never do his job, but what I do know is that him and countless others will go to bed sleeping with Breonna's face, still hearing her say her name. I hope you never know the pain of your child being murdered 191 days in a row. Tamika Palmer.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. I'm Tiffany Cross, and it is so great to be back with you under these sad circumstances. Now, we have a lot to get to this morning, including Donald Trump's expected pick of Amy Coney Barrett to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. And we'll definitely get to that later in the show, I promise. But I really wanted to start this show this week with the growing demand for justice for Breonna Taylor. Demonstrators took to the streets of Louisville again yesterday to protest a grand jury's decision to indict just one of the 3 officers involved in the killing of Breonna with wanton endangerment for recklessly shooting into a neighbor's home, but not for killing Breonna. Now, before her name became a rallying cry and before police officers kicked in her door, Breonna Taylor, or Bree as she was known to friends and family, was a proud emergency room technician. Bianca Austin even donned her niece's EMT jacket while reading the statement you just heard, written by Breonna's mother, for whom the unimaginable trauma of losing her daughter was understandably too much to bear. Now, the 26-year-old Breonna had dreams of becoming a nurse and buying a house and having a child with her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker. They had already picked out a name, and Walker had even purchased an engagement ring and planned to propose. Breonna tweeted in November that 2020 would be her year. But on March 13th, the police arrived instead, bringing all those dreams to a screeching halt. Joining me now to walk us through this incredibly tragic situation is Tamika Mallory, co-founder of Until Freedom, Kentucky State Representatives Charles Booker, who recently ran for Senate, and Attica Scott, and political contributor at The Griot and MSNBC contributor Dr. Jason Johnson. Thank you guys all so much for being with me. Attica, I do want to start with you because sadly you were arrested last night, and I'm glad to see that you were out, and I'm told that as soon as you got out, you went back to the streets to join the protesters. Something interesting I find about your arrest, you were charged with 2 misdemeanors of unlawful assembly and failure to disperse, but you were also charged with a first-degree rioting, which is a Class D felony. So this puts your seat at risk. It puts your right to vote at risk. This case obviously means a lot to you that you would risk all these things by taking to the street. So tell us what happened last night.
Well, I was arrested on Thursday night along with my teenage daughter in the district that I represent. I'm a state representative for Kentucky House District 41, and we were trying to get to sanctuary at the First Unitarian Church, which is in the district that I represent. And it was 8:58. It wasn't even curfew, and we were hurrying to try to get to the church. And the police stopped us. They told us to turn around. As we tried to turn around, they yelled, circle them, and surrounded us so that we couldn't go anywhere. And I'm so grateful that I was going live on Instagram, because you hear us asking them, what do you want us to do? You're not letting us turn around. You're not letting us literally cross the street. We have 2 minutes to get to the church. And then they yelled at us to sit on the ground and began arresting us.
So let me ask you, because there were 20 armed members of Oath Keepers, who is this right-wing militia group who were so concerned about protecting the property of Louisville. Were any of these armed right-wing protesters arrested that you know about?
Not to my knowledge, no. And I wouldn't expect it, because they seem to work closely with the Louisville Metro Police Department.
Well, there was a video of some of these members speaking with law enforcement in Louisville, and I should state that Kentucky is an open carry state, and they certainly exercise their right. I wonder how the protesters would be greeted if they exercised the same right, but certainly we don't want to incite any violence, and I'm so happy that you're safe and well. And with that, I have to go to you, Tamika, because When you spoke yesterday, Tamika, I think you may have made some in the shrinking majority uncomfortable, but for so many millions of people across this country, you expressed the very thoughts they were thinking. Tell me why this case has brought out so much passion, and not just you, but the many thousands, tens of thousands of organizers across this country. Tamika, are you with me? Tamika, I think you're on mute, so we'll work out your audio problems. And with that, Tamika, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
great. Go right ahead. That's all right.
Great. I think that for most people, and particularly for Black women, we understand that we could be Breonna Taylor any day because of the circumstances of what played out in this situation. We've listened over and over. I know I have. I'm sure that others who are on today have listened to the story over and over. And we're not stupid. We're able to understand very clearly that Breonna Taylor was killed in her home, literally for no reason at all. And if we don't fight for her, one, because she is a Black woman and she deserves the same type of energy that we give to the fight for our brothers who are also very deserving of it. But in this situation, you can't come up with anything that Breonna Taylor did to deserve what happened to her on March 13th. Usually, they give us some type of excuses that we still reject. But in this situation, they are literally fabricating a story to try to make up circumstances that just are not true, one. And two, they literally lied on a no-knock warrant application to be able to gain access to her home. And as a result of those lies, she died, and no one is being held accountable for it.
So that I want to bring you in, Mr. Booker, because this is something I have a lot of questions. One, the no-knock warrant itself. There was a lot of cut and paste information on this no-knock warrant. Daniel Cameron, who's the Attorney General in Kentucky, his synopsis of what happened left me feeling with a head scratch, because I really didn't understand everything that happened with the grand jury. Tell us why it's so important that we get the transcript of what happened with the grand jury. And I, for one, I want to know the demographic makeup, the ethnic makeup of the grand jury, because as we've seen in this country, those things actually matter. Are we ever going to see this, and why does it matter?
Yes, we will see it because we're all here declaring it, and we're not going to stop fighting until we do. But the question is about transparency, and that is central to justice. And we want justice. We deserve justice. Our humanity demands justice. And this Attorney General, who I knew before, I don't know now, has hidden behind the law, has shirked away from his responsibility, and has essentially kept an entire country, certainly this Commonwealth, in the dark. And the family of Breonna had no idea what the process was entailing. And even when he made his announcement, he was picking and choosing amongst the facts that were apparently politically expedient for him. And so, yes, we deserve to know exactly what did he present to the grand jury? What did they consider? Because it's very apparent they did not consider the life of Breonna Taylor. And that is absolutely disappointing and unacceptable.
Jason, I want to turn to you on this because you spoke so eloquently and passionately as well this week when you were on with our colleague Nicole Wallace on Deadline White House, and you talked about the humanity. I want to encourage everybody, if you have not read the September issue of Vanity Fair, Ta-Nehisi Coates interviewed Breonna Taylor's mother, and he did so incredibly beautifully because you just hear her words of what happened that night. And I want to let our viewers know, the night that Breonna Taylor was shot and killed in her apartment, her mother did not know. Breonna Taylor's boyfriend called her and said they burst in the door. He thinks they shot Breonna. She went to the hospital. She waited for hours. They said, we don't have her. She went back to the scene of the crime. She got the runaround. Little did she know Breonna was still inside the apartment, and Ta-Nehisi walks us through what happened that night so eloquently and tragically, and it's heartbreaking. Jason, you talked about this, why this is so important to so many people across this country. What do you say about the landscape right now where our lives, typically as people of color, specifically as Black people, specifically as Black women, where we feel routinely discarded? What do you say to the people to convince them Breonna Taylor's mother loved her daughter the same way so many other people love their children? How do we get beyond this point?
The first thing I want to say is that for the people of Kentucky, there's a reason that Charles Booker is here and the person who's running isn't. You need someone who represents you, who cares about citizens in your district. And I'm very happy that he's here, even though he's not the nominee. This is what we're talking about. This is why we're pained. Because the people who are supposed to represent us, whether that's in the case of Daniel Cameron, whether that's in the case of the nominee for that particular state, aren't out there speaking on behalf of dead black bodies. That's why we're pained. That's why we're angry. That's why we're disgusted. It's also very frustrating and very painful for us because, quite frankly, Tiffany, and you and I have talked about this, many of us have talked about this, is that it's almost if black people have to perform agony on the air, on radio, and in writing in order to get the rest of America to recognize our humanity. It shouldn't require one of the most brilliant writers of the 20th century, Ta-Nehisi Coates, to interview her mother in order for us to realize that this 26-year-old woman got shot in her house for doing nothing. It shouldn't require us to go on the air and have to hold back tears to say, hey, she was sitting in her home. She didn't do anything wrong. It doesn't matter who she dated, and none of these cops are being held responsible. And that's why we're so angered. And I have to say this because I think this is really important. Look, I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV. But to the degree that people are jumping up and down and trying to defend this behavior, this was not a sober, objective application of the law. Because if it was, why are so many racists excited about it? See, I don't get this excited about, like, traffic court, right? The reason that so many bigots in America can get excited about this is because they know that Daniel Cameron just announced, just like we saw with Botham Jean, just like we saw with Philando Castile, just like we saw with Tamir Rice, that you can kill black people whenever you want under any circumstances, and the law, whether it is being delivered by a white person or a black person, will defend you. That's why we're angry. That's why we're disgusted. That's why Tamika's speech was so powerful. That's why you talking about this issue to start the show is so important. That's why Mr. Booker here is so important, because we have to talk about our humanity, if not to white people who don't want to listen, to black people who fear that it's going to be taken away for our audacity for wanting to live and breathe every day.
So with that, I'll kick it back to you, Mr. Booker, because I think Jason raises a very good point. Amy McGrath is the Democratic nominee running for Senate in the state of Kentucky. There was a lot of questions about her role in joining the protesters and speaking out about this. Has she spoken out about this case at all? Has she made any demands of Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General, the Republican Attorney General in Kentucky? Do you know?
Well, although I haven't heard it, I also have to admit I'm not listening and expecting what anyone else is talking about on this issue, because I'm focused about the fight for justice. And I'm grieving with Ms. Palmer and the entire Commonwealth. And I'm honored to be here with Representative Attica Scott, who is the lead sponsor for Breonna's Law. And I'm proud to be a co-sponsor with her. We're doing the work. And so anyone else that is pursuing leadership needs to be accountable to that too. And I hope that she does. But we're here today because we know that Breonna's name is not going to be put on a shelf. Our humanity is not going to be thrown away, and we're going to keep fighting for our Commonwealth and our country.
Well, I want to say we did not invite Amy McGrath on to join us today. We have such a packed show. I wish that we could, but we will invite her to join us tomorrow, because I'd love to hear her thoughts on this, as this is such a hugely important issue. And Attica, I do want to acknowledge that, yes, you are author of Breonna's Law, which would end no-knock warrants. I'm not sure if that would change the hearts and minds of people who continue to devalue black life. Tamika, I want to go back to you really quickly. What does justice look like for you and your fellow activists on the ground there? What do you want to see happen from this point?
I think, one, Mayor Fisher needs to fire these officers. He still has the power to fire the officers responsible for Breonna Taylor's murder. I know that there is an investigation where actually there are 6 officers who are being investigated for what happened that night. And we specifically, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the family, have zeroed in on Joshua James, the officer who wrote the no-knock warrant application that the judge signed. And so that is one piece. And I also think that, as has been said with Representative Scott and Booker, Breonna Taylor's family has been very, very clear that they want to ensure that whatever we do here, it helps to impact how communities are being policed, not just in Louisville, but in Kentucky and across the country. And so my organization, Until Freedom, will be joining these great leaders to travel the state of Kentucky to get Breonna's Law passed.
I appreciate that, Tamika, and I just want to punctuate the point that if you saw the Republican Attorney General of Kentucky's press conference, if you left confused, so many other people did as well, and I encourage you to read. There was a great piece in the Washington Post this week which dispels some of the falsehoods that are out there floating around, and it's just so tragic that here we are again trying to defend and define our humanity. I know there's a lot happening in the nation's capital and a lot happening with the Supreme Court, but it was very important to me to have this conversation to kick off the show today, and I appreciate you all joining me to have this important conversation and bring it to the viewers. So thank you so much, Tamika Mallory, Charles Booker, and Attica Scott. Jason will be back with me in our next hour. Next